Hey everybody, Mr. Stafford here, and today's 5-minute history lecture is about Bacon's Rebellion. So let's get to it. What happened? Well, this is a rebellion. It's an armed rebellion led by a guy named Nathaniel Bacon. What might be remarkable about it at the time, well, what was remarkable about it at the time, one of the things that was remarkable about it at the time is that Nathaniel Bacon was able to organize a very diverse group of colonial residents. He had poor farmers, slaves, former indentured servants, current indentured servants, all rising up against the colonial elite. So you can imagine how terrifying this was for the colonial elite who felt as if they were on the brink of losing control. So it's going to be important. Jamestown is burned. Governor Berkeley is challenged and ultimately recalled to England. This is a big, big moment in colonial history. And the question is, well, two questions. Why did it happen? And what were the lasting impacts? So let's deal with the first question first. Why did it happen? Well, if you look down here, let me move myself so you can see a little bit better. If you look down here, you'll see that most of the prime real estate in the colony of Virginia was settled by 1650, which meant that if you came after 1650, you had to push into what we would call the frontier or the backcountry. And that came with conflict with Native American groups. So as indentured servants earned their freedom and eventually fulfilled their commitment of service, they would be freed and they would seek opportunities for themselves, right? That was the dream, that you would come and you would have all the opportunity you could take. So they would move into the backcountry. They would be these Western farmers, and they would be right on the borderlands with Native American groups, and that led to conflict. They were hoping to get support from the colonial elite. They didn't. In fact, the colonial elite said, do not attack the Native Americans, because the Native Americans were pretty lucrative trade partners, and the colonial elite had a monopoly on some of the fur trades with the Native Americans. Didn't want these former indentured servants and Western backcountry farmers to get in on the action. Okay, so there is a lack of support from the colonial government with these Native American conflicts. Trade policies were seen by the Western farmers, those backcountry frontiersmen, to be oppressive. They were benefiting only the wealthy elite who had already established their position in wealth in society. And so that was seen as a reason for rebelling. And then finally, there's historians who suggest that Nathaniel Bacon, who himself was an elite, had a beef with Governor Berkeley, and that this was personal, and that he wanted to run the colony in a different way. Okay, so why does it matter? Well, I'm going to go back to something that I just said, that Bacon was able to unite across racial and ethnic identities, across vocation, because what people realized is what they had in common was their economic status. And what they wanted to avoid was the establishment of an economic caste system like they had seen in Europe. So the rebellers, those that were taking part in Bacon's rebellion, were fighting against an economic caste system. And we're going to see that over and over again in early colonial American history, that there's this desire to break away from that European tradition of a landed aristocracy. Now, we'll talk about whether that actually happens or not. Because there's ultimately going to be the development of a landed aristocracy, particularly in the South. Okay, another important consequence of Bacon's rebellion was a shift in labor systems. So the primary source of labor in the early years of the Chesapeake colonies, Maryland, Virginia, was indentured servitude. These were usually young white Englishmen coming from England and indenturing themselves for a period of years in exchange for passage to the New World and what they called freedom dues, which usually were a long gun, so some sort of rifle, and an opportunity to acquire property and then themselves get in this hunt for wealth and prosperity that the New World offered. All right, so why are we shifting away from indentured servitude? And where are we shifting to? Well, those indentured servants, when they become free, what the governor finds out and what the colonial elite in Virginia find out is, if they don't realize the American dream, if they don't realize the dream of the New World, they're going to get pissed. And they get upset at the colonial elite because they think it's the colonial elite that are blocking them from that opportunity. Right? So they are a threat. They are a big threat to the colonial elite. So rather than continue to import indentured servants, the colonial elite say, well, let's look to a different group. There were already slaves in Africa. They did not necessarily have the same rights because they were not Englishmen. They were African. They were easily distinguished. So let's go to Africa for our labor source. And this is where we start to see the numbers of slaves being imported into colonies like Virginia just start to go through the roof. All right. Ultimately, I think something that's really important and relevant to us today is this is the beginnings of racial consciousness in the American colonies. A lot of historians will point to the conversations now in Virginia being not about rich or poor, elite or working class, but about white and black. And whether this was on purpose or not, the colonial elite were offering the poor whites an opportunity to be part of the in group by giving them legal status that was attached to their whiteness. So that term, Oxford Dictionary says that term white appears in print for the first time in 1671. So there's this growing consciousness of a racial identity. So what the colonial elite are realizing is if we can get people on our side who are not in our economic band, then we won't be threatened by these types of rebellions in the future. So this is the beginnings of that conversation in the colonies and legal conversations about whiteness and blackness. And we start to see that in Virginia's laws after 1676. There will be certain privileges and rights afforded to white people and denied to black people. Right. And so I think that's a really interesting story as well. There's much more there. So if you have questions, bring them to class because we got answers. All right. I'll see you later.